Hi guys, I'm John Yusha. I'm here from the YouTube marketing team, and I'm so excited to be here with Leap Motion CEO and co-founder Michael Buckwald. And before we get started, I just want to explain what this space is all about. Obviously, we're in the distribute section of the sandbox, and we're all about talking about once the product is designed and developed, how do you get it out there? How do you distribute it? And Michael is here on hand after building an amazing piece of technology to talk about how he did that, the struggles he faced, and what advice we could get out of that. So Michael, I'm super excited to have you here.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
Awesome. I got to tell you, when I heard we confirmed you, I feel like my inner science fiction fan came out, because the technology that you're making, and I'll let you talk about it instead of me raving it. I feel like you're bringing that to life and just breaking all frontiers. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what Leap Motion is all about? What does it do?
Yeah, Leap Motion is about tracking hands and fingers in space very accurately and in a way that can be applied to anything that has a computer. So we want people to feel like they are reaching through their computer screen, reaching into the digital world, and doing things like molding a piece of clay with their fingers, grabbing a ball and throwing it. All of the things that we're able to do with the physical world around us, making those possible in the same easy, accessible way that we have interacted with the physical world our entire lives.
Awesome. And let's just talk about how it looks tactically. It's a physical little device that goes below. It plugs into your USB. Can you talk about how it looks so we get just a clear idea of what Leap Motion is?
Yeah. So the first product based on the technology is the Leap Motion controller, which we're selling for $79, and it's a small, lighter or pack of gum sized device that connects via USB to a computer and turns the area around the computer into a 3D interaction space, so that you can use your hands and fingers above the device to control the computer.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'm just curious, how many people in the audience have heard about Leap Motion before? Awesome. So your technology is really pushing the ground. Some people say that it may make the keyboard, the mouse, a thing of the past. I know perhaps you're trying to think about it as a complement or thinking about those things evolving, but have you ever had a moment where you thought that the product was perhaps a too bit ahead of what consumers are used to, and how have you adapted to that?
Well, I think the way that we think about it is in terms of a 5 or 10 year journey. So our goal has always been to transform how people interact with computers, and for us that means not just the PC, but also transforming how people interact with their car, their TV, their VR headset, their mobile device, and computers and form factors that don't exist today at all. And we are starting with the PC, and for the PC it isn't about replacing the mouse or keyboard, it's about doing all the things that you just can't do well with the mouse or keyboard. But we don't really think of ourselves as early or late. It's about bringing motion control to the world, one market at a time, over a significant period of time, probably 5 or 10 years.
And what I know you mentioned those pain points. What do you think Leap Motion is helping push past? What is Leap Motion helping to make easier by changing the form factor of interacting with your computer?
Yeah, the inspiration for the technology goes back to a problem that my co-founder David Holtz, who's our CTO, realized 6 or 7 years ago, which is that even though a small child can build something out of Play-Doh that kind of looks like a coffee cup in minutes, a professional 3D modeler takes a half hour to do the same thing, or an hour to do the same thing. And that wasn't because computers aren't powerful, because everyone in this room has a processor in their pocket that's more powerful than a supercomputer was 15 years ago. And it's not because people aren't creative, it's because there's a barrier between us and our computers and technology. And that barrier are input devices like mice and keyboards, which are binary. You are pushing the X button or you're not pushing the X button. You're clicking the left mouse button, not clicking the left mouse button. And if you compare that to an action like grabbing a cup and drinking from it, that's an incredibly complex action, but we do things like that thousands of times a day. We're successful 100% of the time, and it's completely thoughtless for us. And that's because we've evolved an almost magical ability to use our hands and fingers to interact with the physical world. And that's what we want to bring to computers, so that someone can see a piece of clay, see a physical object, reach in, and because they already know how to do that, they can be doing something like creating a 3D model that they never would have been able to do with a keyboard and mouse and drop-down menus and instruction books and keyboard shortcuts.
Right, that's awesome. And I think a lot of developers have seen the value of what you're trying to do with Leap Motion. I know we were catching up the other day and you mentioned that there's over 100,000 developers currently trying to build on the Leap Motion platform. How did you get such a community around the product, and did you have that mindset from day one, or is that just something that evolved?
Yeah, we've always wanted developers to be on the platform, and we have to focus on making great tracking technology and building great tools for developers, but we can't possibly create all of the experiences or tackle all of the problems where Leap is valuable, because the technology has implications that are as diverse as casual games to surgeons in the operating room and professional engineers, and so we absolutely have always wanted to empower developers to do great things with the platform. And today, as you said, there are about 100,000 developers in over 100 countries that are using the device to do really interesting things, and that makes us feel great.
And can you take me through, because I'm trying to sit in the shoes of a lot of I/O attendees. Maybe you have a product out there, maybe you have a platform where developers are trying to build on it. How did you, from day one, go from one developer to 100,000 developers? Like, how did you reach out to them? Did they just get to hear about the product and were so passionate about it and they want to develop? How did that process happen for somebody who is just trying to get their first developer on their platform, let's say?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that the biggest thing was the fact that people are excited about and really care about this. And like you said, the reason that so much of science fiction for such a long time has talked about and depicted new interfaces, I think it does reflect this sort of subconscious realization or conscious realization that we need more with computers, and that it is the input and the interface that's holding us back. And I think that developers, more than most people, realize that as well. So I think there is just this intrinsic excitement to being able to build something truly new and solve problems that are fundamental, like what is the best way to build an application where someone is interacting with a 3D model with Leap? What's the best way to build an application where an elementary school child learns by dissecting an animal? What's the best way to build something like a shooting game with motion control? Those sorts of problems are not tackled on a daily basis when developing for other things, and it's, for some developers that's not attractive, but for many it's exciting and challenging, and they get to be a part of building foundations that will help other developers as well. But there are also little but very important things we do. We work with developers very closely, and we attend events all over the world and show the technology to people. And we've devoted a lot of energy to the SDK and making it really easy for people to develop, and that's an ongoing journey. There are many things we are doing today, and an infinite number of things we can do in the future to make it easier and more accessible to people.
Absolutely, and in addition to showcasing Leap's technology at events around the world, it sounds like you're hosting events at Leap Motion's headquarters and bringing developers in month by month to help them interact with your product. Can you talk a little bit about what these events are, how you and what exactly happens at them with the company and the developers?
Yeah, one thing that I think has been very successful for us, besides attending outside events, has been to host our own meetups, bring developers in, and that gives us a chance to speak a little bit more informally with them than we would at big public events or through things like blog posts or social media, and to show them what we're working on before we've released it to the public. And we also we do pretty often bring developers into our office on a casual basis. If we have a feature we want to test, if we just want to talk or have a roundtable about the SDK or something like that, we'll do that as well. And that's really, really helpful. Ultimately, the people whose entire lives, or even if they're sort of a more amateur or part-time developer, the people who are passionate about developing on top of the platform, they have so much expertise from that focus. So it's really important.
That's fantastic. So can you talk about a little bit more about your journey? Are there any things you wish you would have done differently in distributing Leap Motion's technology during your early days? Any mistakes that we could learn from to avoid and move on from?
Yeah, I mean we've made a lot of mistakes, and we probably make mistakes every day. And what we're trying to do, and I think what anyone trying to build a platform and a fundamentally new interface has to do, is such a broad challenge that there are countless ways they will make mistakes, countless ways we've made mistakes. But I think the most important thing is to be really focused on the core value that technology brings, and in our case that is the tracking and developers, and making sure that you have really strong relationships with those developers. And I think that as long as people have that focus, they will overcome and sort of thrive from the inevitable mistakes that they'll make.
Awesome. Something else that caught my eye when we were talking the other day was that you mentioned that you're in over 3,000 stores and distributing Leap Motion's technology. Can you again take me to the early days of who is the first store that you partnered with? How did you even get that relationship going? Because I know a lot of people are building amazing technology, and the big thing is, okay, I have it, but how do I get it out in stores? How do I get it in consumers' hands? And I think you've done such a great job both on the developer front and the consumer front. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's a great question. And when we launched about a year ago, our only retail partner was Best Buy, which is a major retail partner, and they have about 1,000 stores in the US, but we had no international retail presence, and since then we've had to build out our own retail sales team, and we have to have people in Europe, in Japan, in China, working with retailers. But today we are in about 3,000 stores in 15 countries. It is very challenging to get retail, and I think that maybe it shouldn't be the primary focus, because even before we were in retail, the best thing we did was take pre-orders from customers. And whether you do that through traditional pre-orders that you take on your website, like we did, or through some sort of crowdfunding, I think that is the best way to demonstrate real, tangible, material interest in the product. And that you can then take that to retailers, and that's very powerful. That's probably the far and away the most efficient way. And also, the reality is that you can build a successful business with hardware, selling it to customers through your own website today. And certainly that's how it will work with the pre-order period, but even after the pre-order period, your own website can be a major sales channel today in a way it wasn't before. So even if you can't get retail, you can still build a great business selling a product directly to consumers.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we've seen a paradigm shift in how commerce has worked, moving online. So in closing, I want to ask one question, and I want to open it up to you guys to be able to ask questions of Michael. Any other last piece of advice? And I'll preface this with saying no cliche answers of how somebody can get out there and distribute their product. Anything you learned in the journey that you want to share here before we open it up to the floor?
Well, I think that the most important thing I would say is people shouldn't be afraid to build hardware products. And I say that even though we don't necessarily think of ourselves, strictly speaking, as a hardware product, but even today there is sort of this cloud around hardware in the sense that it's too expensive, or it's too hard, or it takes too long. But there are a lot of real advantages to building a hardware product, and I think had we not chosen to first build a peripheral before we tried working with OEMs like HP and others to embed the technology, I think we'd still be here calling up people and trying to convince them to embed it, because other people are slow and OEMs are risk averse, and you have to, I think it's, I'm not going to say have to, but if you decide that you have to own it yourself and build it entirely yourself, you shouldn't be afraid to do that, because there is an incredible ecosystem that exists today that didn't necessarily exist a few years ago, that makes it not easy but possible for startups to build hardware and distribute it globally.
Fantastic. So with that, I think we're going to take the mic from the back. So if you guys have questions, we could ask Michael. Does anybody have a question to ask of Michael? Nobody? There we go.
Hi, Michael. My question is, when you first started to get the marketing material out, how many different forms of online media did you use? Because I know like social media is really important now. So did you use all mediums of social media, or did you just use like content media online, like through Google search?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we've tried to embrace all media. I don't know if we've quite succeeded because I think one of the things that we're still developing, for example, is having a bigger presence in global social media. But at least in terms of the English-based social, we've used pretty much all of the channels, and I think you have to do that. The cost to integrating another social channel is pretty low relative to the value, assuming that it has a sufficiently big audience. And I think any platform or anything that is sufficiently different needs to reach out to a lot of different people. Like we want surgeons to know about Leap, but we want elementary school teachers to know about Leap, and that requires us to reach out broadly. I think we've tried to do that with media as well.
Yeah. So with that, I just want to thank Michael so much for his time, and thank you guys for participating. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.